this one that's like a multi-level name. Well, I need to make some of these national stuff. But he doesn't have like a very good process. He has to get one has to get a shot where he starts next. He doesn't work. His grandmother died.
And if you have to get tickets,
Good word, my parents.
Okay, let's begin. Let me have your attention. It's my privilege to welcome you to the University of Tennessee Nuclear Engineering Department Seminar Program. Today we have a very special seminar. We try to have a seminar like this at least once a year. It's totally out of the box, so to speak, even outside of the nuclear box. The only thing nuclear about today's seminars are the two speakers. And with that in mind, the first speaker is our own Dr. Larry Miller, who recently took a trip to Germany in search of his family roots. And he came back and he told us that he found some. And so I asked him to share the information that he gained in his trip with us in a seminar, and he's agreed to do that. A little bit about Dr. Miller's background. He received his PhD in nuclear engineering in 1976, and then he joined the faculty here at the University of Tennessee. Prior to that, he worked for both the Westinghouse Astronuclear Laboratory and Westinghouse Bettis. Okay, and he is the first speaker today. And then when he finishes, I'll get up here and introduce the second speaker. So, Larry, welcome.
Okay, thank you. Did I shut the door?
Yeah.
Give you a little bit of background before we start on the slides. About a year and a half ago, I learned from one of my sisters that they had some old German letters and so on, and I had also a cousin who runs a Chevrolet dealership out in western Kansas, had actually gone to Germany and visited one of our relatives. Turns out that we have 3 grandparents and 1 great-grandparent that came over from Germany, and we knew nothing about any of them until about a year and a half ago. And so I have a couple sisters that are a bit adventuresome as myself, if that's adventuresome, and they decided that they would go along. So we actually have 2 trips that I have some slides on. So on the first one, we went to visit the relatives that come from my mother's side. They're Nussers, and that was the great-grandparents that immigrated from Germany in like 1860 or 1870 or something like that. So I'll tell you a little bit about that trip, and I have more slides than we need, so I'll flip through them rather quickly. And if you have any questions, then stop and we'll chat about it. Okay, this is give a little bit of background. On the first trip, we went into Frankfurt. My sisters found some real cheap tickets from Denver to Frankfurt for $400 a piece. So they live in Kansas, and so they went that way. And my wife and I came out of here. But this is a typical countryside road in Germany. Now, I understand from, I think, Peter, Dr. Grower, that many of these tree-lined roads are that way from customary from the horse and buggy days, so they wanted shade and drove the horses and buggies from one small village to the next. So it's really kind of picturesque, I think. This is another, wait a minute, I've got too many of them here. Okay, these are, it's too sensitive.
Just one thing.
Okay, there we go. I missed a couple here. I need to get a little better on the clicker. Okay. There we go. This is we'll get it down here pretty soon. Okay. This is one of a number of churches. This one actually would have been in Göttingen. The first night we went from Frankfurt to Göttingen, and Göttingen actually is a rather well-known university. it was probably the center of physics up until World War II. Heisenberg, there's a Max Planck Institute there, which I think I drove by, as I recall. And so basic quantum mechanics such were developed to the large extent in Göttingen. And also the brothers Grimm come from there, which are the fairy tale people, and I think it's probably appropriate that the fairy tale people and the quantum mechanical people come from the same place. Anyway, this is part of Göttingen. This is more countryside. This is, I think, in Würzburg, this is one of my sisters, and my wife and a sister. We got 250 slides together. Okay, you're going to see all of them. Okay, actually, we've gone from Würzburg, looks like, to Rothenburg now. If you're familiar with German geography, Göttingen is a little below Berlin and kind of off to the right. And then we drove down the Romantische Straße, starting out in Würzburg, and then down to Rothenburg. And one of the places that we had to go when my wife could go along was to go to Rothenburg. It's an old walled city, which is kind of like Gatlinburg in some ways, many shops, but it's very nice. So this is typical. And this is, you see in front of the wall there. And this is you can interpret that any way you want. Okay, so this is another church. One thing that amazes me about, and I understand from Dr. Perez, that if you want to see old, expensive churches, go to Spain. It's the best place in the world to do that. But almost every small town has a multi-billion-dollar church, it would seem. I mean, of all of the ornamentation and so on in these places, it's unbelievable. This is more of Rothenburg. So I'll give you a flavor of Rothenburg here. I got too many clicks there. This is typical architecture, and even in the smaller villages, the close together houses, which it's picturesque. I don't think I'd want to live there. I like the American style housing a little better in that regard. These are some folks entertaining you with music, so you spend more money in the shops, and we did spend some money in their shops. One of the things that I thought was particularly interesting, this is where we stayed. We stayed in the old walled city as well, in this hotel here. There was a Christmas store, which is about as big as this building, several levels. It was, I thought, unbelievable. If you've gone to a Christmas shop in Gatlinburg, then you know a little bit about what they are, but this one is everything you'd ever expect or want in a Christmas shop is there. We had a hard time finding it. And, my wife speaks, at least one time, better German than I do, which is not very good. But then when we asked for the Weihnachtengeschäft, then we found it very quickly. That's a sister. This is the edge of the wall. That's the outside of the wall there.
Is that the wall surrounding the town?
Yeah, the wall surrounds the town. It's probably at least a mile across. And it probably dates back to the 1500s, I would think.
Was it possible to exploit during the war?
I don't know. About some places were and some places weren't. But I really don't know as to whether or not that Rothenburg was in any way destroyed or not.
Those mostly Lutheran churches?
In the southern part of Germany, it's essentially all Catholic. The northern part, it's they don't say Lutheran, they say Evangelisch, rather than that. And then in the middle is kind of a mix, actually. But I think this is a Catholic church.
Are the church from the film? Are
What?
they usually from the film on Sundays or are they?
I have no idea. I think not. I think that that most people in Europe don't go to church. They sleep in. Okay, this is we're in a different city now. We've gone from Rothenburg to Ulm. Ulm is this is the Munster in Ulm, and it's actually it doesn't work. You want to save me, Garrett? There we go. Einstein was born in Ulm. Walking around, we saw an Einstein cafe, and so this is one alcove of the Munster. But this was built, I think, in like 1400 or so. And I guess 2 years ago, we were in Paris, and Dr. Dodds here was our leader, and Anyway, the same thing is in France. You see huge churches that were built in the 1300s, and I don't think you could have enough money in the federal budget to build one of those things today, but it took them like 100 years to do it. This is outside of Ulm. It's called Blaubern, and it's there's a little pool here that I guess gets its name. You can see there's a reflection of the church off the pool. Oh, now we've gone someplace else again. This was where we first met our Nestor relatives, and we were about 10 minutes late where we were supposed to be. I mean, they were on the doorstep waiting for us, and then we've done it twice, and the same thing has happened. I would never do that, but nevertheless, it was an amazing reception, I thought. And most of them could not speak English, and we speak very bad German, but we were able to communicate to some extent. So anyway, these are a Nestor twins moving again. Okay, so these are part of this is actually the church where my great-grandfather would have been baptized, and it's a Evangelisch community that's mostly Catholic. It's in Bavaria, so you get that far south, and most everything is. And the villages are either one thing or the other. Generally, there's either Catholic or evangelical churches. This was a little memorial to the people that lost their lives during the war, and I took a picture of that because the Nestor relatives that were in the war in Germany didn't fare as well, I guess, as the ones in the United States. Unfortunately, I guess. I had I'm the last of 8 children, and so there's quite a bit of time separation. And one of my cousins said that he sat outside of Berlin for 90 days waiting for the Russians to arrive, which is the historical record says it's like 30 days. So I don't know whether it's the truth. Anyway. But so they were. This is the little castle, or most also the little villages of any appreciable size have or at least at one point they had regional landlords of sorts, and so that's the one in Beckingen. Beckingen is about halfway between Stuttgart and Munich. So they do have German wine and beer as well, you notice there. And we had ample supply of it while we were there. This is Neuschwanstein. From there we went down to Neuschwanstein, and this is kind of an interesting, you've been there, right? It's an interesting castle that really didn't get used that much. It's in southern Bavaria. This is, some of these are kind of faded. I took some of these pictures out through a window, and so it didn't get much clarity. These are there's a kind of a high bridge there, you'll see, which is, I thought was kind of interesting. So I took several shots of that. This was in May. And the small villages like that are very typical as well. One of the things that surprised me is that there don't seem to be any freestanding farmhouses. In the United States, you see freestanding farmhouses, and there are small villages, and they're clear. The fields are all clear, and so they go out from the villages and do their farming, I guess. This is more of Neuschwanstein. This is must be more. Yeah, this is still the same thing. There are a couple of castles there. That's one of the other castles. And we rode up on one of these horse carriages and walked back down. So one of my sisters has a gimpy knee, so she rode down. That's okay. This is at Bodensee. That's my wife. We went from Bodensee, took a ferry across to Mainau Island, which is kind of a Butchart Gardens, if you've ever been there. No, that's if you look on the map, there's a relatively large sea, kind of separates Switzerland and Austria and Germany, and so that's on the northern side of that sea. And it's probably like 50, 60 miles in length, and they have relatively large ships there, but they're all, I think most of them are built in Switzerland, and so they then service the area. And this is Meersburg, which is just right near, it's on Bodensee. And here we were, I have a brother-in-law that worked with somebody from, he worked at Boeing, and is our tour guide here and host was then, this is on the boat. Well, this will work. Okay, this is Gerhard actually here. He was our host. That was a redwood tree. I never heard of redwoods in Germany before, but that was it. And this is the gardens on Mainau Island. This thing is. Okay, this is our group there. This is sculptured greenery. Yeah, if I can give a detective mouse here.
Where's the controller on the screen here, Bridget?
There's not a PowerPoint presentation.
Good.
Let's see. There you just hook down one. Get it on the.
Can you advance?
That one?
Yeah.
Okay. We do that. Okay, so this is.
You can pick it up.
Okay.
The keyboard you can pick up.
Okay. Let's see if it's working now. This is a small church there on Mainau. This is part of the ceiling. And these churches, this one isn't one of them, but on Meersburg there was a Catholic church that the Pope had visited 3 times actually. And they're all in what we refer to as Baroque style, if that's pronounced correctly. And this is typical of what goes on and what's in these churches. This is looks like the Butterfly House. Remember when Jenny Parsons gave her talk? This is the same place. This is Heidelberg. So from this was Bodensee is kind of in the south, and then we went actually from there over to Freiburg, as one of my grandparents supposedly came from Freiburg, and actually in a small town was called Merzhausen. Actually, if you just pronounce it with English pronunciation, you say Merzhausen. And so I asked where this little town was at like a service station for the Sylvan. I said, "Where's Merzhausen?" And she looked at me like I was from some other planet. And then I spelled it, and the lady next to me says, "Ah, you mean Merzhausen." So the same spelling, but the pronunciation is different. And so if you use English pronunciation of letters in German, you wind up not doing very well. This is a castle at Heidelberg. Heidelberg has some interesting university history as well. Okay, this is the next trip, and this is in Munich. So when we got to Munich, the first thing, there was a demonstration going by of school children, about, how are we doing on time? 12 years old, and about 2,000 of them. They were marching along. This is maybe 2 or 3 blocks from Marienplatz. And they were protesting the use of children as finding mines in Cambodia, and also as little children, soldiers in Africa. So apparently, children that are light don't set off mines very well, and so you use them to walk out in the field to find the mines. And they were protesting that, as well as giving 10-year-olds guns and such. This is a cafe in the same area. This is the marchers going by. This is Marienplatz. So this is the Glockenspiel there. That's a church right off the edge of Marienplatz. There's a little better. Okay, here's one of the speakers at the Marienplatz, and there's another Glockenspiel.
Get to hear those organs play, the pipe organ.
No, didn't hang around for that. Here's this says, "Put an end to the devil's circle of violence." Actually, I thought Gewalt meant power, but then I asked one of the bystanders who actually spoke English, because it has a double meaning. And that one says, "The power of love and empathy is stronger than the power of a weapon." I don't know if that concept is tested very often. The children seem to think it was a good idea. There's more Marienplatz. That's the red. We got too late there. This was in the area of where the Nusser relatives went to the second trip. These are people being quizzed. It was on a Saturday, actually. Quizzed whether they could be confirmed or not. Notice they had American T-shirts on. This is more. A lot of the graveyards are like such, and they also only stay there 20 years, and they dig you up and replace you with somebody else. But they go to a lot of trouble to keep things very nice looking, I thought. And this is the same church from that's the local castle. That's that's a Catholic church in Dillingen, actually. This is in Dillingen also, which is right close to a couple of nuclear power plants, 50 nuclear power plants. Actually, one of the nuclear physicists married to one of my third or fourth cousins runs the radiological control program at that's the reactor there. That's the best picture of the whole thing, actually. And this is a Easter market. It is, I thought, kind of interesting. You can buy all sorts of very nice artwork, I thought. I didn't buy any, but okay, now we're in Nordheim, actually. The person on the left turns out to be a second cousin. The one on the right is Nusser, and he's a Hanko descendant. turns out that up until the mid-50s, my family had letters that went back and forth. And so anyway, this is a restaurant we went to. This is interesting. Siegfried, which is the second cousin, once removed, on the house, he put up, you notice there's an American flag and appears to be a Confederate flag and a German flag. So that was, and they're wine growers, and so I brought back 6 bottles of wine, and they didn't get broken on the plane. So this is the crew that went up to the top of the wine fields. That's from the top of a tower there, and this is in Nordheim. So that's, again, typical. This is the tower built in like 1500, so that you could look for enemies trying to steal your grapes. And that's the one back here. That's an old Roman road. It's 2,000 years old, according to Siegfried. These are, and here, I guess every spring you have to tie down the vines, and he speaks no English, but anyway, he made a joke. The people on the left, they had 2 vines sticking out to tie down, and he keeps 4, and he says the rich people only need 2, so they do that, but I'm a poor farmer, so I tie down 4. And the truth of the matter may be somewhere in between, depending on the soil and the type of grape and so on. And this is one of the few castles, if any, in Germany that has 2 towers. Siegfried said he used to play there, in the base of that. That's more of the castle that we visited. This is the wine tank. They make 70,000 liters a year. This is testing the wine, see if it's ready to be shipped. This is a wine filter. This is wine ready to be shipped. And this is, okay, now we're back in, this is in Dettingen, which is where my grandmother, which is a Heinkel descendant, was baptized. And we didn't know these people existed until about 4 months ago, actually, and they had pictures of my grandmother and grandfather, and I thought that was kind of interesting. The young person there, he could speak English, actually. That's where my grandmother was born. They even knew that. And I asked one of the ladies here, why somebody would leave such a nice little town and go to the middle of Kansas. And she said, well, her father had 21 children from 3 different wives, and the stepmother didn't like her much, so she left and became my grandmother. So you learn lots of things when you... This is over Dettingen, and this is a community orchard up here, which is apparently one of the things that my grandmother used to think was interesting. So you can pick and then pay for what you pick. This is a museum in Dettingen that they opened up for us. This was late 1800s type furnishings. This is their school desk then, and it was on slate rather than paper because this paper was in not very good supply. That's the church. These are, okay, this is the person reading the paper there is Hans Haas. Actually, when he retired, fairly well up in Mercedes-Benz. This is a little room where he had, and he's got, one of these is a picture right here. The one, that's the end of it. Okay, this is where he's with the president of Bavaria. So he was proud of that. Okay, I've done my half an hour. I've done more than a half an hour.
Well, you're okay.
Okay.
Are there any questions or comments for Dr. Mellon?
Man. What do they do with the corpses after they dig them up?
I have no idea. That's an issue that has been buried. It's like 30, 20 years or whatever, but that's probably practice all over Europe. Not just for
Yeah,
you.
they're on top of the other people.
They may do that in early on. But if you buy a place for 20 years or 30 years, you can rebuy it though. So you can sequentially buy it for 1,000 years if you want to. Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, let's give Dr. Miller a round of applause. Okay, before I introduce the next speaker, presenter, I should say, entertainer, we in our electronics here, we can select settings that are optimized for a seminar like we just heard from Dr. Miller, and we can select settings that are optimized for music, okay? And we tried the music settings and one of the settings, and we had a little trouble. And so right now we've got settings for a typical seminar, and it worked a while ago in our test. But there's a chance that it'll go to zero, diminish. The signal will diminish. And so for the benefit of our cyber audience, if you lose the signal, if you lose a connection, just wait a few moments and try to reconnect with Real Player, because most of you know what that is. So it's quite possible that we'll lose a connection with the music as opposed to a regular speaker, but hopefully we won't. So we do, just wait a moment or two, like a minute, and then reconnect. That's my pet fly flying around there. Okay, now for our next speakers, let me get your chair. I know where it goes. This is where we had it a while ago. All right, let me tell you a little bit about Wesley. Wesley is one of our graduate students. He received his BS in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Tennessee about 2 years ago. And then he came over and entered our graduate program. He's been working, his research is in the area of Generation 4 reactors, in particular light water reactors, the Irish reactors. He just defended his thesis, and he defended it well. He passed, and he's completed all the requirements of the MS degree, and I think he plans to continue on for his PhD, but he's also a very talented musician, classical guitar player. And so I thought it was a good idea that as a compliment to corollary for Dr. Miller's presentation, that we have a little genuine arts and improve our lot in life from the standpoint of the arts. And so I asked Wesley to play for us. And Wesley, well,
okay. Yeah, I'll go over there. Not that Dr. Miller wasn't an artist himself. I was seeing him in the other room. Let me see here. I'm Wesley. I was going to tell you a little bit about the classical guitar and some of the differences. Kind of the guitar was nobody really knows where the guitar really began, who was the first person to make a guitar. It just kind of evolved out of various instruments around 15th, 16th century, sometime in there. But the classical guitar, it's a little more solid. First, the Spanish started playing more of the classical style, and the real innovator is Andres Segovia. And I'm saying, you know you've made it when you've got your own stamp. He was the real innovator of, the classical guitar style, which, to play classical music, but it's also a set form. You sit a certain way, you use certain hand positions, certain finger movements, and that's what the main reason that sets it apart. And reading, sheet music just like any other musician. And the people laughed at him when he was young, but he really revolutionized the guitar and was an international superstar. Played up until he was 93. He still performed. And some of his concerts were 30,000 people, 35,000 people, and he played without amplification, if you can imagine. Wow. And they said that you could, when he raised up, he would give kind of a look to the people, and you could hear a pin drop as it's complete silence. And they said the Segovia hush, that it would just become quiet. A little bit more. This is another guitar player who I've personally met. I kind of want to tell you about myself. I played in a master class with Parkening, who is a disciple of Mr. Segovia. He's an American guitarist. Started when he was very young and became internationally famous too by the time he was like 20 years old. Very nice guy, but he's one of the premier guitarists today. In case you're looking for recordings out there, I met him, played a master class. Maybe I'll tell you about that a little bit later. Here's some other guys I've met. Mr. Fisk, you see him with the King of Spain and Bill Clinton. So classic guitarists around, you know, they're famous too. This is my teacher from Costa Rica, Paulo Ortiz. Aaron Shear, who I've met, I've learned his method. Okay. And Muriel Anderson, who I've also met, she actually is local. She's in Nashville and famous in the guitar world today. She was also a student at Segovia. Now, get to my first piece. This is a Allegretto from the Sonatina en La by Moreno Taroba. Taroba is a Spanish composer. He really composed the zarzuela, which is a kind of Spanish opera, but Segovia asked him to write some pieces for the guitar, and he's probably has the most music, classical music for guitar in the 20th century. He's written somewhere in the range of like 80 pieces, I believe, for the guitar. And this is the Sonatina en La. The next piece is by the Brazilian composer Hector Villa-Lobos. He's probably one of the most famous composers from Brazil. He composed a lot of he composed in the style of a lot of the popular music of the time in the 30s and 40s in Brazil. And his preludes sometimes mix the sounds of that with the even older Indian sounds. And this prelude, which was the homage to a countryman, used kind of an Indian folk tune. And he also integrated some other ideas like the viola caipira, which is kind of a smaller guitar, but another style which came over with the Portuguese and the Catholic Jesuits. You can hear it in the middle. He's kind of imitating that sound. So this is the prelude number 1. piece is another one by a Brazilian composer, Ari Barroso. He was also a big influence in Brazilian music. A lot of people say he was the first one to invent the samba music, which is one of the big arguments in Brazil. Everybody thinks they did it, but he may have been one of the guys that came up with it at the same time. This piece is probably made famous by Carmen Miranda, which everybody knows, the one with the fruit on her head, and the Brazilian people don't like. They think she misrepresents them, which is probably true. But this piece has become pretty much a jazz standard in the U.S., and I'd heard it many times, and one day I thought, I'll sit down and make my own transcription and try to make it more of a samba feel than they had before, because usually our jazz players just play it big and wide sounding, but this is my transcription of Aquarela do Brasil. The last piece is probably one of the most well-known classical guitar pieces this is by a Spanish guitarist, composer, Tárrega. He was the generation kind of before Andrés Segovia, before classical guitar was really solidified, and he was one of the precursors. You can see his form over there. He's got the classical form, which a lot of the books after his time were written based on his form, and some people still swear by it exactly. But he was a real innovator. He wrote very lyrical music, I think, for the guitar, and very Spanish style. The Recuerdos, the most well-known one, probably most well-known classical guitar piece, in the Concierto de Aranjuez, is written about the Alhambra, which is a castle in Spain, and I have some pictures that hopefully we'll go through while I'm playing, and you can see some of them some of the beauty that he found in it to write this piece. It uses the tremolo, which is using all of your fingers to make kind of a singing sound. Because the note dies off unless you keep digging. So it's a way of making your tone continue, which was very innovative. It was kind of taken from the flamenco style too. They also use a similar peg. So this is the castle. You can see it's beautiful.
Okay, we have a few minutes for questions, comments for Wesley.
How long did it take you to learn all those pieces of practice?
Oh my goodness. I've just the last week. No, I'm just kidding. No, let's see, I've been playing for about 13 years total. And let's see, the Villa Lobos piece I've been playing for probably about I don't know, 9 of those years. But some of the other ones, like the last one I played, I've been playing maybe 6 months, 1 year. But to learn a whole piece sometimes can take the longest time, especially to memorize it. And a year isn't long in a classical guitar's mind.
Have you ever had formal lessons?
Yes, I took lessons. I've taken lessons for probably about 11 of those years. I'm not taking right now because I'm too busy with my pieces.
What is the meaning of the first word, request?
I'm sorry. It's the memories of the Alhambra. Like he had been there, of course, many times, and it was his memories or thought.
Any other questions, comments, for Wesley? Okay, pardon?
His email.
Oh, thank you. Having a senior moment, which I seem to have more frequently. We do have a question from our cyber audience.
Okay.
Who is your greatest musical influence? And then the second question. When playing, is there a scintilla of fear? This comes from Scott Williams.
Yeah.
That's your brother?
Yeah, that's my brother who's bragging me a little bit. I would say probably my greatest musical influence was Andre Segovia. It's kind of a tie. I laugh saying it's twofold. Well, Segovia was mainly of the Spanish descent. There's another guy named Barrios Mangare who was from Paraguay and lived basically, he was a little bit older, but if you go to the Latin American countries, they swear by him instead of Andre Segovia. And his music, he was a composer as well, and Segovia wasn't as much of a composer. So both are really my influences.
And one final question or comment. I know for a fact that you get a lot of encouragement and support from your wife.
Yes.
So why don't you introduce her and tell us where she's from? Put the camera on her.
Thanks for picking me up. No, this is my wife, Gabriella.
Go back to her and zoom in.
You don't have to do that.
Yeah,
That's
go back.
embarrassing.
Now zoom in.
It's her in the glasses. No, that's my second wife. Yeah.
Now, introduce her and tell us where she's from.
This is my wife, Gabriella. She's from Costa Rica, which I hope you all don't tell her if you don't know where that is. And we met. It's funny. We met here. I guess it's been 13 or 14 years ago, when her mother went to the university here as a Fulbright scholar, and we met in middle school. I guess, 12 years old, 11 or 12. So.
Okay. All right, very good. Before we adjourn, I see we do have a few visitors today. You probably don't know that we do have refreshments down on the second floor, and everyone is invited, including the new visitors. But before we adjourn for refreshments, let's express our appreciation again to Dr. Miller and to Wesley for today. Thank you very much.
That's good. Give up engineering. Okay. Give up engineering. Position.
That was again.
No. Yeah, that's
Deserve some recognition.
No.
How's it going? Very well. Enjoyed it. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.